Starcraft, The Legacy of Real-Time Strategy by Simon Dorr is the latest book in the University of Michigan's landmark video game series. And thankfully in this case, they picked a game that really is a landmark video game. It had a huge impact on the real-time strategy genre, and it's very well loved even today. It's a great game, and I'm really glad that they made a book on it. This book, unlike what I was expecting, offers a unique perspective on just esports. That's really what a lot of this book is. It's about the esports legacy in South Korea. It wasn't what I was expecting when I started reading this, and it kind of tainted how I viewed the book, so I'm going to be cutting out a lot of the notes that I took on this. So the book doesn't really start with this. It begins with an event in the esports community that I don't really have any frame of reference for. It just didn't really mean anything to me. I'm sure it was an important moment or something like that, but it just kind of fell flat to me. Then it goes into a rundown of the real-time strategy genre and gives us some of the basics. He points out the games that inspired Starcraft. The majority of them made perfect sense to me. And then he brought up one that kind of seemed a little weird. He starts talking about Populous, and I wasn't really expecting that to show up in a book like this. Mostly because for whatever reason, I don't really think of God games like Populous or Utopia as being real-time strategy games, even though they do have a lot of similarities, especially Populous. After reading what he said, yeah, it did make some sense that it was there, and it does make some sense that, he included it. He does use a few words that I don't remember him establishing. I think he probably did, but I just don't remember them. He uses phrases like decoding, decoding paradigm, and foreseeing games, which I assume he explained at some point, but I don't ever remember the explanations in the book. I most likely missed them, so I can't really fault him for my confusion over them, but some of that did create an issue for me when I was reading this. I really did like the history that he included in here because it's really fascinating. It gets a little weird when he talks about real-time strategy on the home consoles, though, just because I don't think it was really necessary to be in here. Every so often with one of these books, especially in the landmark video game series, it feels like there's some padding thrown in just to stretch it beyond 100 pages, and that sort of felt like what he was doing when he starts bringing up the home console stuff. It did remind me that Starcraft 64 existed, so that was kind of cool. And yeah, it brought up a bunch of really fun stuff that, I never would have really thought of, like how Starcraft's major rival was Total Annihilation, and a few of the other games that were mentioned as well. So that was all cool to see how all these different games built up to something like Starcraft. A lot of this book seems to really revolve around multiplayer and esports, which I understand that's a very big thing. It's really important, especially Starcraft's esports scene was important in South Korea. And I understand why he goes into this. Every researcher and writer likes to focus on the parts of the history of video games that they deem important to whatever they're talking about, or are important to themselves. In this case, it was a story about South Korea's esports, how it was created, how it kind of revolved around StarCraft, and that's really cool to read about if you're super into esports. I'm not. So that was sort of not really all that interesting to me when he starts going into it. However, he does bring up some of the unwritten etiquette in video games in this part that I thought was pretty cool. There are rules that players adhere to in sort of an unspoken way. For Starcraft, he brings up the no rush rule. This was something where for a few minutes you would give your opponent just time to build up their base. And then once that, let's say 5 minutes is over, then you're allowed to attack each other. And that's kind of cool to see because I didn't really know too much about it. And it just sort of reminded me of other weird things like in Tecmo Bowl when I would play that with my brother, and there was, the don't look at my controller etiquette when you're selecting your plays, or don't pick odd job when you're playing GoldenEye 64, or the quarter being put on a cabinet to signify that you're going to be the next person playing when you're playing a fighting game. I don't know if people still do that, but that's one of the ones that I remember. There are others, but those are the ones that I know about, or at least come to my mind when I was writing this. I never really thought about any of these rules, and it would be interesting to see what other unwritten rules exist in multiplayer games and online games, and even in the arcades. It's just really cool to see these different things. Now, I will say this, the book is extremely interesting if you want to know more about Starcraft and its impact on South Korea, specifically with esports and them building up like an esports economy there. There is a lot in here about why things were different in South Korea, how the stigma of being a gamer really wasn't there in the 90s, and it's pretty cool. And while I did find some parts of it very interesting, I just don't really care about esports all that much. It is very cool to learn about the history of video game competitions, and this was a much bigger deal in South Korea, specifically the Starcraft competitions and everything like that. And then you get into some of these weird things where it seems like every esports community thinks that they invented esports, which I find really fascinating. And yeah, I can say this, one thing that the book really did was make me want to research video game competitions and also just look up all these different unwritten rules in video games. So that's two things that I took away from this book. The rest of it, I was just kind of like, well, it's a nice history of esports in South Korea, but yeah, I wasn't really connecting with it very much. I thought the book was okay. If I were more interested in esports or StarCraft's connection to esports, then I would have enjoyed this a lot more than what I did. There are some really great things in here, and I'm sure the stories are interesting, but I was kind of struggling to care when he was talking about esports, especially when he was going over some of the teams and some of the players. I just didn't know who they were, and I didn't know why they were really important or why I should care. That was more of a problem on my end than on Simon's. It was clear that Simon has a personal connection to this game and also to esports, or at least playing multiplayer. He includes some of that in the book, and I thought it was pretty fun, and it adds a lot to just what he's talking about, because you can tell it's coming from a place of just really... It's coming from a place of him enjoying it, and he's got a lot of memories connected to it, so that's pretty awesome. Reading this did bring back some memories for me of just playing real-time strategy games in the 90s. Simon mentions a ton of games in here that I remember fondly, like Dune 2, Warcraft, and Command & Conquer. However, one game that he mentioned kind of got me thinking, and I believe Simon makes a wonderful point about it, and that was Total Annihilation. It was a game that I hadn't thought of in a very long time, and yeah, it has a lot of similarities to StarCraft, and I think it's a little better than StarCraft, but that's just me when I go back and look at it, and it kind of made me want to play both games and just see if my memories of them are really matching up with what I'm thinking right now. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.